I signed exactly what they wanted, and they celebrated like they had just won the jackpot. They did not know that signature was merely bait. By the time my mother walked into the courtroom, they realized bankruptcy was not a weapon they could use against me. That judge transformed their plan into evidence of a crime right before our eyes. The thing that kills fastest is not a gun, but a signature in the right place at the right time. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 37 years old, and my entire career at Pinnacle Forge Systems has been built on the ability to predict disaster before it makes the headlines. I live in the Riverside District, a stretch of the eastern coast where the fog rolls in heavy and the houses are built to withstand hurricanes. Yet, everyone inside them seems fragile. I thought I was good at spotting structural weaknesses, but I missed the rot in my own foundation until the phone rang at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was my husband, Grant Hale. He did not say hello. "I am filing for divorce this morning," Grant said. His voice was terrifyingly casual, the same tone he used when ordering a steak medium rare. "And before you ask, you will not see a dime. I have made sure of that. The lawyers have everything." I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my office, watching the gray Atlantic Ocean churn below. Most women would scream. Most women would cry or beg or ask why. I did none of those things. I simply looked at the reflection of my own eyes in the glass. They looked tired, but they were dry. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You win." I hung up before he could gloat. He needed to believe he had broken me. He needed to believe that his preemptive strike had left me paralyzed. That was the only way this would work. In my head, I was not panicking. I was starting a stopwatch. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the boardroom for the quarterly internal audit. The air conditioning was set too low, chilling the sweat on the back of my neck. The room was filled with men in expensive suits who thought they were smarter than the calculator in my pocket. The chief financial officer was presenting the quarterly projections. "As you can see," he said, pointing to a graph that climbed steeply upward, "our operational costs have decreased by 12% due to the new vendor consolidation." I narrowed my eyes. The numbers were too clean. Real financial data is messy, it fluctuates and breathes. These numbers were stagnant and polished. It smelled like formaldehyde. It smelled like fraud. The presenter clicked to the next slide, but for a split second, his laptop lagged. The presentation minimized, revealing his email inbox on the massive projector screen. It was only there for 3 seconds, but that was 3 seconds too long. The top email was unread. The subject line read, "Family Council Strategy, Phase 2. My heart stopped, then hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. That was not a Pinnacle Forge email. That was personal. That was orchestrated. Seeing that phrase in this room confirmed everything I had suspected but was too afraid to voice. This was not just a divorce. This was a corporate extraction. They were not just taking my marriage. They were coming for my professional standing. I kept my face impassive, under the mahogany table. I slid my phone out of my pocket. I typed a message to Owen Rusk, the only lawyer in the city who hated Grant's family as much as I was starting to. The message was 3 words: "Activate Protocol 5. I put the phone away and nodded at the CFO as he resumed his speech about profit margins. The drive home was a blur of gray highway and rain. When I pulled up to the driveway of our colonial-style house, I saw it. A single black suitcase was sitting on the front porch steps. It was soaking wet. It was a prop, a piece of theater designed to humiliate me, to show the neighbors that Claire Whitmore had been discarded. I parked the car and walked up the path. I did not cry. I did not kick the suitcase. I stepped over it without breaking my stride, as if it were nothing more than a fallen branch. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the silence of the house. Grant thought he had fired the first shot. He thought he had destroyed me with a phone call and a suitcase, but he was an amateur playing a game he did not understand. The thing that kills people the fastest in this world is not a gun. It is a signature in the right place, at the right time. Grant stood by the fireplace. He looked like he was posing for a magazine cover that would never be printed. He held a tumbler of scotch, swirling the amber liquid with a smugness that made my skin crawl. "You look terrible," Grant said, taking a slow sip. "I hope you did not think you were keeping the house." "I have Cole Barron coming here at 9 tomorrow morning. Cash offer." "Done deal." I let my shoulders slump. I made myself look smaller, defeated. It was a posture I had practiced in the mirror for 3 years, waiting for this moment. "Grant, please," I whispered, staring at the floor. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That is not my problem," he replied, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I built this life. I built the company. You were just an accessory, a decoration that got too expensive to maintain. I canceled your credit cards an hour ago. I changed the passwords to the joint accounts. You are destitute. Claire, accept it." He wanted me to scream. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a thin blue folder. My hands shook slightly, a calculated tremor. "I know," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the lie. I do not want a scene at the office. The board is asking questions about compliance." "Just sign the routine disclosure forms so I can tell them we are handling this amicably. Please. Just for the sake of the stock price." Grant laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Fine. Give it here. Anything to get you out of my sight." He snatched the folder, uncapped his fountain pen, and scribbled his signature on the bottom line without reading a single word. He tossed the folder back at me. "There," he sneered. "Now get out." I picked up the folder. I stopped slouching. The tremor in my hands vanished instantly. I opened the document to page 4 and turned it around so he could see the capitalization table I had highlighted in yellow. "You might want to read what you just signed." "Grant," I said. My voice was no longer a whisper. It was steel. He frowned, squinting at the paper. "What is this?" "That is a termination notice for cause," I explained calmly. "And that figure in yellow that shows the current equity structure. You seem to be under the impression you own the company, but if you look closely, you will see that 61% of the voting shares were acquired last week by a quiet little entity called Harbor Morrow Meridian Holdings." Grant went pale. That is impossible. I have majority control. Harbor Morrow Meridian Holdings." I continued, pointing to the signature line at the bottom of the holding agreement. "Managing partner Claire Whitmore." Grant stared at me. The glass of scotch slipped from his fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. He scrambled for his briefcase on the sofa, tearing at the zippers. "You are lying." He spat. He pulled out a crumpled document and slammed it onto the coffee table. "I have the transfer right here. You signed over your voting rights 3 months ago. I have your electronic signature." I looked down at the paper he was pointing at. It was a digital transfer authorization. It looked official. It looked terrifying. But I did not blink. "Grant," I said, tilting my head. "Look at the date stamp in the corner." He looked. "What about it?" "It is dated November 31st, I said softly. "November only has 30 days. And look at the name. It says Claire Elizabeth Whitmore. My middle name is Elise." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Grant looked from the paper to me, his eyes widening as the reality of his mistake crashed into him. "You did not just lose your company." I said, "You are standing there holding a felony forgery, and you just showed it to a risk management officer." Grant's face twisted. The arrogance dissolved into something feral, something dangerous. He lunged toward his laptop. "You think you are smart?" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I will burn it. I will empty the accounts tonight. I will sell the IP to the Chinese before the courts open tomorrow. You will get nothing but ashes." He was not posturing anymore. He was terrified. And a terrified man destroys everything in his path. I waited exactly 3 minutes after Grant slammed the front door before I moved. He was panicked, driving to his lawyer's office to try and salvage his crumbling empire, which left the house and his secrets unguarded. I walked into his study and locked the door behind me. This was not a snooping wife looking for lipstick on a collar. This was a forensic audit. I slipped on a pair of latex gloves from my emergency kit. I could not leave fingerprints on the evidence. I went straight for the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk, the one with the false bottom I had noticed 6 months ago when the depth did not match the exterior frame. I pried it open. Inside lay a thick stack of documents labeled Project Lighthouse. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure camera app, photographing every page. Click, turn, click, turn. Chain of custody was everything. If I touched it, I documented it. The papers were a blueprint for arson, metaphorically speaking. There were unauthorized power of attorney forms with my name forged on them, ready to be notarized by a crooked clerk. There were wiring instructions to route liquid capital through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. But the smoking gun was a draft contract selling Pinnacle Forge's core intellectual property to a firm called Stonegate Meridian Partners for a fraction of its market value. "You idiot," I whispered to the empty room. "You are not selling the company. You are looting it." Taped to the underside of the drawer was a cheap prepaid phone. I powered it on. It had 12% battery left. The messages were a stream of consciousness between Grant and a contact saved only as RV. "RV, do not flinch. If she suspects anything, we trigger the insolvency clause. Grant, my mother is nervous. She thinks Claire is asking too many questions. RV, tell your mother the family trust is insulated. Just get the signature." RV was Roland Vane, the company's senior board advisor. This was not just a greedy husband. This was a corporate coup d'etat orchestrated by a man I had shaken hands with at the Christmas party. I dialed Marcus Hale, the head of IT security at Pinnacle. He answered on the first ring. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "Initiate emergency protocol Alpha. I need you to revoke Grant's administrative access immediately. Hard lock, no overrides. I am already looking at the traffic." "Claire," Marcus replied, the clicking of his mechanical keyboard audible in the background. "I can kill his session, but, Claire, there is something else. What is it? I am detecting a passive signal originating from your personal laptop. It is a keylogger, hardware level. It has been recording your keystrokes for at least 3 months. My stomach turned over. They had been watching me type every password, every email, every private thought. Trace it. I commanded. "The data packets are being engaged by a static IP address," Marcus said. "It is residential. It is coming from the Kingswood Estate District. Roland Vane lived in Kingswood. Kill it," I said. "Scrub my device and lock down the perimeter server." And Marcus, "If anyone asks." The system crashed. Understood. Going dark now. I hung up and went to work on the physical house. I went to the central hub in the hallway and reset the master code, locking Grant out of his own smart locks. I disabled the garage door opener remotely. I pulled 3 battery-operated micro cameras from my bag devices I had bought with cash 2 towns over and stuck them in the blind spots of the living room and hallway. By the time I was done, the house was no longer a home. It was a fortress. I sat in the dark of the living room watching the driveway on my phone screen. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when the motion sensor tripped. A car pulled up, but it was not Grant's Porsche. It was a sedan I did not recognize. The doorbell rang. It was a hesitant, short sound. I walked to the door and checked the monitor. A woman was standing on the porch. She was young, shivering in a coat that was not thick enough for the rain. She looked terrified. It was the woman from the photos I had seen in Grant's hidden cloud storage. His mistress. I opened the door, leaving the security chain on. "I did not think you would answer," she said, her voice shaking. "Grant is not here," I said coldly. "I know," she said, looking over her shoulder as if she were being hunted. "I am not here for him. I need to show you what he made me carry." She held up a small silver USB drive. Her hand was trembling so hard she almost dropped it. He said it was insurance, she whispered, but I think it is a death sentence. I undid the chain and opened the door. Come in, I said. Tessa Crow sat on the edge of my beige linen sofa, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of hot tea I had brewed not out of kindness, but to stop her teeth from chattering. She looked younger than 26. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting to see if she would be punished. The silver USB drive sat on the coffee table between us, a small piece of metal that weighed more than the entire house. I want a settlement, Tessa said, her voice trying to find a jagged edge of confidence that simply was not there. Grant threw me out, but I know things. I want $500,000. A severance package. If I get that, I disappear. If not, well, the press loves a story about a toxic work environment. I took a sip of my water, watching her over the rim of the glass. She was trying to play poker, but she was holding her cards backwards. Tessa, I said, my tone professional and detached. You do not work for Pinnacle Forge anymore. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, your employment was terminated for gross financial misconduct. Her eyes widened. You can't do that. I will sue for wrongful termination. No, I said, setting my glass down. You won't. Because I have the independent audit report from this morning. It shows 42 unauthorized approvals from your terminal. You are not a whistleblower, Tessa. You are the scapegoat. Grant did not just sleep with you. He set you up to go to prison for him. Tessa went pale. The defiance drained out of her, leaving only raw fear. She looked at the USB drive, then back at me. He told me it was just to speed things up. She stammered. He said the board was too slow, that we needed to move capital to protect the company. I just signed where he told me to. Show me, I commanded. I opened my laptop and plugged in the drive. It was not just a backup. It was the real ledger. While the official books showed standard vendor payments, this file showed the truth. The money was being funneled to ghost vendors companies that did not exist and then routed immediately to a shell corporation in the Caribbean. And the routing number linked directly to an account associated with Roland Vane. He made me approve the batch transfer, Tessa whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. He woke me up at 2:03 in the morning. He was frantic. He said, "Do it now or we lose everything." So I used the override code. I froze. 2:03 in the morning. Last night. Yes, she said. He was laughing afterwards. He said he had created a signature that was better than the real thing. He said Stonegate had already accepted it. My blood ran cold. Stonegate Meridian Partners. They had accepted a digital signature at 2 in the morning. That meant the wire transfer was queued. As soon as the banks opened, millions of dollars would vanish, and my name was on the approval line. Tessa, I said, leaning forward, listen to me very carefully. You are going to hire a lawyer, not one of Grant's friends, but a real criminal defense attorney. And you are going to swear under oath that Grant stood over your shoulder while you typed those codes. Why would I help you? She asked, her voice trembling. You hate me. I do not care enough about you to hate you, I replied. But if you do not cooperate, I will hand this audit to the FBI, and you will be the only name they see. Grant made sure of that. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, nodding slowly. Then she looked up, her expression shifting to something haunted. There is one more thing, she said softly. When we did the transfer, the 2-factor authentication code, it didn't go to your phone. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean Grant was holding a different phone? Tessa said. A burner. The code came to him. He punched it in. He laughed and said, Roland holds the keys now. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. This was not just theft. They had redirected the security protocols. Roland Vane had my digital identity. He could sign contracts, sell assets, and approve debts in my name, and the system would recognize it as legitimate. This was no longer a divorce proceeding. Grant and his family were not trying to leave me. They were trying to erase me. They were executing a plan to strip me of my agency, my assets, and my freedom, using the legal system as their weapon. I looked at the dark window, realizing the sun would rise in 3 hours. And when it did, the war would begin. I walked into the glass atrium of Pinnacle Forge Systems at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. I did not swipe my security badge. I did not stop at the front desk to sign in. The security guard, a man who had known me for 5 years as merely the CEO's wife, started to rise from his chair. I turned my head and held his gaze with a cold, absolute silence. He hesitated, then slowly sat back down. I was not there to ask for permission. I was there to take possession. I took the executive elevator to the top floor and walked straight into the main conference room. Owen Rusk was already waiting on the secure video link, his face filling the main screen. The 3 independent board members were logged in remotely, looking grim. "The motion is on the floor," Owen said, his voice crisp through the speakers. "Removal of Grant Hale as CEO for cause, specifically gross fiduciary negligence and unauthorized asset liquidation. Appointment of Claire Whitmore as interim CEO with full executive powers." "All in favor, aye," said the first member. "Aye," said the second. "Aye," said the third. "The resolution is carried." Owen stated, "You have control." Claire. I sat at the head of the table and opened my laptop. I drafted a memo to the entire company. It was short, effective immediately. All vendor payments are suspended. All external communications are to be routed to the legal department. Any directive from the former CEO, Grant Hale, is invalid and must be reported to security. I hit send. 2 minutes later, the door flew open. Adrian Wolfe, our chief financial officer, rushed in. He looked like he had not slept in days. "Claire, tell me you did not just freeze the accounts," Adrian said, breathless. "I had to," I replied calmly. "We are bleeding capital. You do not understand," Adrian said, slamming his laptop onto the mahogany table and spinning it around to face me. "Look at the queue. There is a wire transfer scheduled to execute at 12:30 this afternoon. $2.7 million. I looked at the screen. The recipient was a company called Vertex Solutions. I had never seen that name on a vendor list before. "Cancel it." "I ordered." "I can't," Adrian said, his voice rising in panic. "It is locked under a merger pending protocol. The system thinks we are being acquired. The payment is flagged as a penalty fee for delay. If I try to stop it manually, the system interprets it as a breach of contract and auto-releases the funds. Unless we have a court order or a federal injunction, that money leaves the building in 4 hours. If that happens, we miss payroll on Friday." My phone vibrated against the table. It was an email from Stonegate Meridian Partners. The subject line was in all caps, "Notice of Obstruction." I opened it. The body of the email threatened immediate litigation for interfering with a lawful commercial transaction. Attached was a PDF file. I clicked it open. It was a voting rights transfer agreement, assigning my controlling interest to Grant for the purpose of the sale. At the bottom was my electronic signature. The timestamp read 2:03 in the morning. Marcus Hale, our head of IT, walked into the room without knocking. He held a tablet in his hand. "I have the forensic logs," Marcus said fast. "The digital signature on that document originated from the IP address at your house. Technically, it looks like you signed it. I was asleep." I said, "I know," Marcus replied, "because I traced the 2-factor authentication packet. The 6-digit code required to finalize the signature was not sent to your mobile. It was rerouted to a burner phone. I pinged the location history. The phone has been sitting in a residential garage in the Kingswood district all night. Roland Vane. He had used my IP to make it look like I was home, but he had verified it from his own pocket. So we have proof of fraud," Adrian said, hopeful. "We have traces." I corrected. "Proof takes weeks. We have 4 hours. The intercom on the conference table buzzed. The receptionist's voice was high-pitched, nervous. "Ms. Whitmore," she said. "Mr. Hale is here. He is accompanied by a Ms. Bridget Sloan. She says she is his legal counsel. They are demanding to come up." I could hear the commotion in the background. Grant was shouting about security clearance. "They are threatening to call the police." The receptionist continued. "Ms. Sloan says you are trespassing and suffering from—" She called it a manic episode. I looked at Adrian, then at Marcus. They were waiting for me to panic. They were waiting for the wife to crumble. "Let them up," I said. "Claire," Owen warned from the screen. "If he is here to provoke a scene, he will use it against you in the hearing." "I know," I said, smoothing the front of my blazer. "That is exactly why I want him in this room. He thinks he is coming to evict a crazy ex-wife. He does not realize he is walking into a crime scene." I turned to the receptionist. "Send them up, and have security stand by the elevators, but do not intervene until I give the signal." Bridget Sloan did not waste time with pleasantries. She placed a heavy leather folio on the conference table with a thud that sounded like a gavel. She was dressed in a suit that cost more than my first car, and she looked at me with the clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing to amputate a limb. "We have just filed a motion for an emergency injunctive relief in the district court," Bridget said, her voice smooth and dangerous. "We are arguing that you, Ms. Whitmore, are abusing your minority shareholder position to exact a personal vendetta against your husband. We are asking the judge to freeze all executive actions taken this morning." "That is absurd," Owen argued from the screen. "Grant was terminated for cause, and we dispute that cause," Bridget countered. Then she leaned back, letting Grant take the stage. Grant was leaning against the window, looking out at the city skyline. He turned to face me, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. "You can fight the injunction, Claire," Grant said softly. "But if you do not unblock the sale to Stonegate by noon, I will release the dossier." "What dossier?" I asked. "A compilation of creative accounting errors," Grant said, shrugging. "Fabricated." "Of course. But I have sent encrypted copies to the Securities and Exchange Commission and 3 major industry blogs. If I do not input a code every 6 hours to stop it, the files go public. The investigation alone will tank the stock price to 0. You will be queen of a graveyard." My stomach tightened. He was bluffing about the validity of the data, but the threat was real. In our industry, a rumor of fraud was just as lethal as actual fraud. He was holding a grenade and threatening to pull the pin if I did not let him loot the vault. My phone buzzed in my lap. It was a text from Tessa. "Grant is just the face. He does not have the encryption keys for the leak. Roland has the password." "Grant cannot stop it even if he wants to." I looked up. I need 5 minutes to consult with my counsel. I walked out of the main room and into the adjacent breakout room where Roland Vane was waiting. He was drinking coffee, looking like a concerned uncle rather than the architect of my destruction. "Claire," Roland said, standing up, "this is getting messy. Maybe we can find a middle ground. If you unfreeze the vendor payments, I can convince Grant to walk away from the house." A clean break. I walked over to the table and placed the silver USB drive between us. Roland stopped moving. "I do not want the house." "Roland," I said quietly, "I want to know why this ledger lists 42 payments to a vendor that does not exist." For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. His left eye twitched, a tiny spasm of genuine alarm. I memorized that look. "I have no idea what that is," Roland said, recovering his composure. "But be careful. Claire, accusations like that require proof." "I have the proof," I said. Owen just traced the wire instructions. "The routing number for your ghost vendor leads to a shell company in Antigua, the same shell company that pays the lease on your Mercedes." Roland set his coffee cup down. "You are out of your depth." "No," I said. "I am just finding the bottom." I returned to the main conference room. Owen's voice was urgent in my earpiece. Claire, we have a problem, Owen said. My paralegal just got a flag from the title monitoring service. Grant is not just trying to sell the company assets. The bank just called to verify a signature. Someone is trying to activate the emergency line of credit on your home. They are trying to draw down $300,000 against the equity. When I asked, right now, Owen said, they are using a power of attorney. They are trying to drain you dry from both ends before the judge can rule. The door opened again. A process server walked in past the security guard, who looked overwhelmed. He handed me a stack of papers. Claire Whitmore, he asked, you have been served. Emergency hearing at 1 o'clock. I looked at the summons. Grant and his parents were suing me for mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. They did not expect to win. They just wanted to create enough legal chaos to keep me occupied while they funneled the money out the back door. Grant looked at me from across the room and checked his watch. Tick-tock. Claire, he said, you have 45 minutes before the wire deadline expires. I looked at the summons, then at him. I will see you in court, I said. The air in Hawthorne County District Courtroom 304 smelled like floor wax and anxiety. Judge Marla Beckett sat behind the bench, looking at the clock on the wall as if she were personally offended by the passage of time. She was known in legal circles as the Scalpel because she cut through theatrics without anesthesia. Bridget Sloan stood at the podium, her posture perfect, her voice modulated to a frequency of pure reason. Your Honor, Bridget said, gesturing gracefully toward Grant, who was doing an excellent impression of a beaten dog. Mr. Hale is the victim here. We have a spouse who has weaponized her minority shareholder status to hold a legitimate business transaction hostage. This is not corporate governance. This is domestic abuse disguised as a board resolution. She is locking him out of the company he built because she is angry about the divorce. I watched Judge Beckett. She did not blink. She did not take notes. Is that so? Judge Beckett asked, her voice dry. Mr. Rusk Owen stood up. He did not use adjectives. He used timestamps. Your Honor, at 2:03 this morning, a digital signature was executed transferring voting rights from my client to Mr. Hale. At that exact moment, my client was asleep. We have forensic logs showing the two-factor authentication code was rerouted to a burner phone located in the Kingswood district. We also found a hardware keylogger on Ms. Whitmore's laptop. This is not a dispute. This is identity theft. He handed the bailiff the stack of logs Marcus had printed. The judge flipped through them, her eyes scanning the lines of code. The silence in the room stretched for 30 seconds. Heavy and suffocating. I am issuing a temporary restraining order, Judge Beckett said, slamming the folder shut. All assets of Pinnacle Forge Systems, including intellectual property and real estate holdings, are frozen effective immediately. No transfers. No sales. We will reconvene for a full evidentiary hearing on Thursday. If a single byte of data moves before then, Mr. Hale, I will hold you in contempt. Bridget nodded curtly, but she did not look defeated. She looked at her watch. We walked out into the marble corridor. I expected Grant to be furious. I expected him to be shouting. Instead, he was smiling. He checked his wrist again. You won the order. Claire, Grant said, stopping by the water fountain. But you forgot how the real world works. The court clerk has to type that order up. Then they have to fax it to the banks. Then the banks have to process it through their compliance departments. Do you know how long that takes? About 2 hours. Roland Vane stepped up beside him. He leaned in close to my ear, smelling of expensive cologne and decay. They do not need a signature to take what they want. Claire, he whispered, they just need the IP to leave your hands. Once the asset is sold to a third party in good faith, the court cannot unwind it. It is gone. My phone rang. It was Marcus. Claire. Marcus shouted, the background noise of the server room drowning out his panic. Grant's physical keycard was just reactivated. Someone inside the building manually overrode the lockout protocol from a secure terminal. Who, I demanded. I can't see the user ID, Marcus said. But it had to be an executive-level override. Someone is opening the back door for him right now. I hung up, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. It was the CFO. It had to be Adrian. He had been too anxious, too eager to explain the wire transfer delay. He wasn't incompetent. He was complicit. Grant and Roland were already walking toward the elevator, moving with a sudden, sharp purpose. They were not going back to the office. They were going to finish the job before the fax machines at the bank started whirring. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Tessa. "Claire," she screamed into the phone. I just heard Roland talking on the other line. "They are doing a double closing. Right now. Where I asked." "Harborline Title and Escrow on 4th Street, Tessa said, her voice breaking. "They have a notary waiting. They are going to sign the deed to the house and the assignment of the intellectual property in the same room. They are cashing out everything at once." I looked at Owen. He was already sprinting toward the parking lot. "Drive," I said. "We have 20 minutes before my life is sold to the highest bidder." Owen drove the sedan like a getaway car, weaving through the mid-morning traffic with a terrifying precision that pressed me back against the leather seat. We were racing against the sun. The dashboard clock read 11:42. We had 18 minutes before the noon deadline, the moment the escrow agents at Harborline Title and Escrow would officially record the deed and wire the intellectual property rights to Stonegate. My phone vibrated on the center console. It was the general counsel for Stonegate. I put him on speaker. "Ms. Whitmore." The voice was smooth, detached, and utterly cold. "We have received your cease and desist. We are ignoring it. If you attempt to physically disrupt this closing, we will sue you for tortious interference. We have a signed contract. You have a fraudulent contract," I said, staring at the blurring city outside the window. "The signature is forged. We do not care about your domestic squabbles." The lawyer replied, "We care about the deal. The paperwork is valid on its face. We are closing at 12 o'clock sharp." The line went dead. They did not care if it was stolen property. They only cared that they had a receipt. "Owen," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "Do we have the physical evidence package in the briefcase?" Owen said, swerving around a delivery truck. "I have the affidavit from the bank flagging the unauthorized credit pull. I have the forensic authentication logs from the IT department showing the rerouted two-factor code, and I have the alibi." That was the key. The alibi. They had used my digital signature at 2:03 in the morning, assuming I was asleep in bed at the house, making the IP address match plausible, but they had not checked my calendar. "You have the footage I asked. The security director at the Metro Convention Center sent it over 5 minutes ago." Owen confirmed. "Clear high-definition video of you standing in the lobby at 2:03 in the morning, overseeing the loadout for the charity gala. You are seen speaking to the fire marshal. Unless you can bilocate, you could not have signed that document from your home network." We screeched to a halt in front of the Harborline building at 11:56. I did not run. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror. I smoothed my hair. I adjusted my blazer. If I walked in there screaming like a hysterical wife, they would call security. I needed to walk in there like a CEO performing a hostile takeover. We marched past the reception desk. I ignored the receptionist's protest and pushed open the heavy glass doors to the main closing room. It was a fishbowl. Grant was sitting at the head of the long oval table, a pen in his hand, a stack of documents in front of him. The representative from Stonegate was checking his watch. Roland Vane stood in the corner, leaning against the wall with a self-satisfied smile, looking like a man who had just won a chess match against a toddler. Grant looked up. He saw me through the glass before I opened the door. He did not look scared. He looked triumphant. He mouthed 2 words to me. Too late. He lowered the pen to the paper. I pushed the door open. The sound of the latch clicking was loud in the silent room. "Grant," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried. "Stop." Get her out of here, Grant said to the notary, not looking up. She has no standing. Actually, I said, walking to the edge of the table, I am just here to congratulate you. Grant froze. The pen hovered millimeters above the signature line. He looked at me, confused by my surrender. What he asked. Yeah, you won, I said, shrugging my shoulders. You beat me. The house, the company, the patent portfolio. It is all yours. I saw the hesitation in his eyes. He expected a fight. He expected tears. My acceptance threw him off rhythm. It bought me exactly 3 seconds of confusion. That was all Owen needed. He stepped forward and dropped a thick red file onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, dull thud that rattled the water glasses. That is a temporary restraining order issued by Judge Beckett, Owen announced, his voice booming. Beneath it is a criminal complaint for wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. And beneath that is a formal request to suspend this notary's commission for facilitating a felony. The Stonegate representative pulled his hand back from the table as if the documents were radioactive. Roland stopped smiling. This is harassment, Grant stammered, his face flushing red. I am signing. If you sign that, Owen said, pointing a finger at Grant, you are not just violating a court order. You are creating irrefutable evidence of intent to defraud. The alibi is in the file. Grant. Claire was on camera 5 miles away when you allegedly signed the transfer. The room went deathly silent. The notary capped her pen and pushed her chair back. I am not notarizing this, she whispered. Not with a fraud complaint on the table. Grant looked at Roland for help, but Roland was suddenly very interested in the pattern of the carpet. My phone rang. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. I looked at the screen. It was my mother. She never called during business hours. I answered. Claire. Her voice was low, tight, and commanded absolute obedience. I am 2 minutes away. Do not let them leave. Do not let them sign. Keep everyone exactly where they are. Why I asked. Because, she said, I am not coming alone. The reason I had hidden the true ownership of the holding company was not because I was afraid of the tax man. It was because I was afraid of the name attached to it. Harbor Morrow Meridian was not just a shell. It was a legacy. Morrow was my grandmother's maiden name. For 15 years, I had built Pinnacle Forge systems to prove that I could stand on my own, that I did not need the suffocating weight of my mother's empire to define me. I had kept my mother at arm's length, visiting only on holidays, refusing her money, refusing her connections. Now, as I sat in the austere wood-paneled courtroom for the emergency hearing, I realized that my independence had been the very thing Grant used to isolate me. The double doors of the courtroom swung open, but it was not my mother. Not yet. It was Grant's parents, Eleanor and Richard Hale. They walked in with Bridget Sloan, their faces set in masks of tragic disappointment. They were not here to support their son emotionally. They were here to bury me financially. Bridget approached the bench, placing a thick stack of documents before Judge Beckett. Your Honor, Bridget said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. In light of the chaotic management at Pinnacle Forge, the Hale family has been forced to file an involuntary bankruptcy petition against Ms. Whitmore personally. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Bankruptcy. That is impossible. My personal assets are liquid. Not anymore, Bridget replied, turning to look at me with eyes like shark glass. We have submitted evidence that Ms. Whitmore is the secret guarantor for 3 commercial loans taken out by Mr. Hale's Ventures, loans that are currently in default. The total liability is $4 million. She is insolvent. Your Honor, she does not have the standing to manage a company she cannot even afford to insure. I froze. I looked at the document Bridget was holding. There, at the bottom of a loan guarantee I had never seen in my life, was my signature. It was the same digital signature from 2 o'clock in the morning. They had not just used it to sell the company, they had copy-pasted it onto debt obligations. They were not just stealing my business, they were drowning me in red ink so deep I would never breathe again. Roland Vane leaned forward from the gallery. He was no longer hiding in the shadows. He was playing the role of the benevolent advisor. "Claire," Roland said softly, loud enough for the press at the back of the room to hear. "Grant's parents just want to protect the family name. If you sign the settlement and step down, they will forgive the debt. We do not want to ruin you, but we have the employee conduct files ready to release if you force our hand." It was a perfect trap. If I fought the bankruptcy, they would release the fake dossier about the toxic workplace, destroying my employees' careers and the company's reputation. If I surrendered, I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back. I stared at the signature on the projection screen. It was my name, my identity. They had taken the curves of my handwriting, something personal, something that belonged to me, and turned it into a weapon to slit my throat. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the table to keep from collapsing. I felt violated. It was not just business, it was an invasion of myself. I did not sign that, I whispered, my voice sounding thin in the large room. "The timestamp says you did," Bridget challenged. I was about to lose my composure. I was about to scream. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the room opened. The air in the room changed instantly. It was not a shift in temperature, it was a shift in gravity. A woman walked in. She was 68 years old, wearing a charcoal wool coat that had no logos but cost more than Grant's entire car. She walked with a cane, not because she needed it, but because she liked the sound it made against the floor. It was Vivian Whitmore. Grant's father, Richard, went pale. He nudged Eleanor, who looked like she had just swallowed a lemon. They knew who she was. Everyone in finance knew who she was. My mother was not just rich. She was the kind of institutional wealth that banks called when they needed a loan. She was a silent billionaire, the type who owned the land the bank was built on. Roland Vane stopped smiling. He sat up very straight, pulling his tie tight as if he were suddenly having trouble swallowing. My mother did not look at me. She did not look at Grant. She walked straight to the plaintiff's table, ignoring the bailiff who started to move toward her. She stopped in front of Bridget Sloan and placed a single, thin file folder on the table. She turned to the bench. Her voice was low, rasping slightly, but it carried the weight of a thunderstorm. "Your Honor," my mother said, "I apologize for the interruption. My daughter has too much pride to ask for help. So she did not tell you that the bank holding the defaulted loans mentioned in this bankruptcy petition is owned by my family trust." She turned slowly to face Roland Vane, whose face had drained of all color. "And I am curious," she continued, looking back at the judge. "Are you ready to try a case of organized fraud right here? Right now? Because I have the real audit logs." Vivian Whitmore did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply turned to the lead counsel for Stonegate Meridian Partners, a man who had been checking his watch with arrogance just moments ago. "You are currently holding a provisional contract with funds held in escrow at First Sovereign Custodial Bank," my mother stated, her tone conversational yet terrifying. "I suggest you check the shareholder disclosure for that institution. I own 34% of the voting stock. I have just triggered an internal fraud investigation protocol regarding this transaction. The money is not frozen by a court order. Counselor, it is frozen because I own the vault." The Stonegate lawyer went gray. He closed his laptop slowly, signaling a total retreat. He knew that even if they won the legal battle, Stonegate would never survive a war with the Whitmore banking empire. Owen Rusk stepped into the silence my mother had created. "Your Honor," Owen said, pointing to the projection screen, "we have established that the digital signature was executed at 2:03 in the morning. We have established that my client was at a charity gala 5 miles away at that exact time. and we have established that the two-factor authentication code was routed to a burner phone registered to a shell company. Judge Beckett leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Hale, explain to me how your wife signed a document from your home when she was standing in a ballroom. Before Grant could stammer a lie, my mother placed the final piece of the puzzle on the defense table. It is not just the phone. Your Honor, Vivian said, I had my team run the corporate registry for the vendor receiving these so-called loan payments. The company is listed as a consulting firm in Antigua, but the registered correspondence address, she pointed a manicured finger at Grant's parents. It is the same address as the Hale family dry cleaning business in Ohio. Mr. and Mrs. Hale are not creditors. They are accomplices. Grant's mother, Eleanor, let out a sharp gasp and covered her mouth. Richard Hale slumped in his chair. They had come to feast on my carcass, only to realize they had seasoned themselves for the slaughter. This is a commercial misunderstanding, Bridget Sloan shouted, trying to throw her body in front of the bullet. My clients were merely sit down, Counselor Judge Beckett snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. I want to know the origin of that signature. Now. A young man in a cheap suit stood up from the back of the gallery. It was the lawyer I had forced Tessa to hire. Your Honor, he said nervously. I represent Tessa Crow. We have prepared a sworn affidavit. Ms. Crow testifies that Mr. Hale and Mr. Vane boasted about harvesting Ms. Whitmore's biometric data while she slept 3 weeks ago. They used a high-resolution scanner to copy her fingerprints and retinal data to bypass the executive security protocols. They created a digital ghost key. The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. It was not just fraud anymore. It was a violation of the most personal kind. Grant stood up, his face purple with rage and panic. He slammed his fists on the table. I had to, Grant screamed, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. She was going to leave me with nothing. I just needed the signature to escape. I built that life. The court reporter's fingers flew across the steno machine. The confession was on the record. Roland Vane, realizing the ship had not just hit an iceberg but had already split in half, stood up quietly and moved toward the exit. Bailiff Judge Beckett barked, Detain Mr. Vane. No one leaves this room. I am referring this matter immediately to the district attorney's office for financial crimes investigation. Roland stopped, his hand on the door handle. A marshal stepped in front of him, handcuffs already unhooked from his belt. Judge Beckett turned back to the bench. She picked up her gavel. The transaction with Stonegate is voided from the start. She ruled, her voice devoid of mercy. The notary commission is suspended pending criminal inquiry. All accounts associated with the Hale family and the Antigua entity are frozen. Furthermore, I am granting the motion for sanctions. Mr. Hale, you are liable for all legal fees incurred by Ms. Whitmore today. Stonegate's lawyer was already packing his briefcase, refusing to make eye contact with Grant. Grant's parents were weeping silently, holding onto each other as the reality of federal investigation loomed over them. The hearing was over. The plan to bankrupt me had been converted into a prison sentence for them. I walked over to the defense table. Grant was slumped in his chair, staring at the table, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He looked up at me, his eyes red and hollow. You ruined me, he whispered. I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just the cool clarity of a balance sheet that finally zeroed out. You said I would not see a dime, I said softly. You were right. I saw the whole system. Judge Beckett brought the gavel down with a final thunderous bang. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut, trapping them in the very cage they had built for me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment your location below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.